Greetings, Emmett here from ReadingforWisdom.com. Mythology. Why should we study it? We live in an age of science. We live in an age of the rational. We live in an age when we have conquered superstitions and brushed them away. So why should mythology be of interest to us? In fact, why should mythology be so important to us? Well, there's a very simple reason. Mythology in most nations and among most peoples forms the sort of foundation knowledge, the foundation stories that cultures are built upon. And the culture in the West has been largely, it could be argued, built upon the stories of the Greeks. The mythology of Greece, the mythology, its pantheon of gods, its pantheon of strange, crazy, fiendish, malicious creatures, its stories of the daring do of heroes, the story of villains, and the story of immortals who behave much as us mortals do. And something that's common to all mythology is it's effectively a collection of stories, collections of characters, stories, and tales. And these were stories that helped shape how people thought about virtue, how people thought about ethics, how people thought about the right way to live, the wrong way to live, how people thought about character. And these stories, which were, of course, for the most part, initially communicated orally through oral poetic traditions, were used to educate children, were used also to create a sort of a common bond, a common memory. Now, these mythologies, and the Greek mythologies in particular, are very important because they informed the people who first laid down the written word, the people who created our foundation literatures. And I'm thinking most of all of Homer. Hesiod is another example, but Homer's Iliad and Homer's Odyssey are without a doubt the foundation literatures of Western civilization. And those books were built, of course, upon stories, and they feature characters from the Greek mythological pantheon. So, how do you get to grips with Greek mythology for a start? Well, unlike my generation, who were largely brought up with these stories, the stories were commonplace. They were commonplace in storybooks that we learnt as children, commonplace in sort of TV programs, cartoons. I think it would be fair to say that that has been largely lost. A lot of young people now and older people are simply not being exposed in the same way to the great stories of Greek myth. Now, there's a couple of approaches, and if we're going to take a scholarly approach, I would recommend digging out these volumes. These are the Greek Myths by Robert Graves, and they are important works. And they're very important works. They came out after the First World War. They came out in the period sort of between the First and the Second World War. Great scholarly works. Graves, who was a hero of World War I. His autobiography, Goodbye to All That, famously recounts his experience in the trenches and the aftermath of war. Graves, of course, is also, for many of us, his most notable work, I, Claudius and Claudius the God, the books that became the foundation to the great BBC dramatization of the life of the Emperor Claudius and some of his relatives and the schemers around him. So Graves, great classical writer, and he took Greek mythology very, very seriously. And he labored, much like Hercules, he labored for a long time gathering up all the various different strands of the story, because Greek mythology, the stories, the characters are quite conflicting. There's lots of tales have come down for the past X thousand years that slightly contradict each other. We can see evolutions of characters. But he took a very scholarly approach, writing in Greece at the time, gathering together notes, gathering together thoughts and ideas on the origins and the evolution of these myths. One notable thing I'll say about Graves that will be of great interest is that Graves believed that a lot of Greek myth, and he believed that the same was true of a lot of other civilizations, a lot of Greek myths came from priests and educated classes consuming psychedelic mushrooms, and that there was a direct link between some of the ideas about the gods, the behavior of the gods, reaching the gods and communicating with the gods, and the consumption of psychedelic mushrooms. Very early on in the 1930s, Graves himself was an experimenter with hallucinogenics. So that's quite a few decades before the sort of 1960s psychedelic revolution. So him, Aldous Huxley, and quite a few other were experimenting with the mind, with the brain, and they brought their insights to the Greek myths. So these two volumes together, now you'll see that these are quite old. They're in the old Pelican editions, so you'll have to look through secondhand shops for them. I'm not sure if there are latest editions available, but for real scholarly reads, Graves is the person to go to. However, if you want to get maybe a less academic brush up on the Greek classics and something more accessible, something that would be accessible to all ages really, something that's very entertaining, very well written, is this book. And it says it all: Lust, Chaos, War and Fate, Greek Myths. And this has been put together by Jason Boyett. It's a fairly recent volume. I really love this work. This is so accessible. He paints lovely little pen portraits of the various different Greek heroes, the Greek gods, and some of the famous stories from the mythological timeline. And he does this often with sharp wit. Quite importantly, is he makes a direct connection and spells out what the relationship between the Greek gods and the Greek heroes and their Roman counterparts. And of course, every day we look up in the sky, we see Mars, we see Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and these of course are Roman names, but they were Roman names largely given to characters that emerged from the Greek mythology. So I really recommend checking this one out. Now, I would be remiss if I just concentrated on the Greeks. Let me take an opportunity to highlight another really good piece of work to have on your bookshelf. This is a bumper, and it's simply called Mythology. Now, I've had this for quite a few years. It's edited by Alice Mills, and is a compilation of the world's mythologies. So it covers the classical mythologies of Rome and Greece, all those great stories, but also we have some of the other Celtic mythologies. We have mythologies from the Slavs, some of the other European races, and then it has Indian mythology, Chinese, Japanese, the American mythologies of the Indian people, of the Aztecs, etc. So really it covers the mythologies of the world, beautifully illustrated. So if I just simply open a couple of random pages, you can see the richness of a book like this. So this is not just a coffee table book to lay open and impress your visitors, but it's something to flick through, to devour, to really relish in the beautiful imagery. And these reproduce images from all mythologies that are sitting in museums, the artworks and recreations of scenes from the myths themselves. So this is worth spending the money on. I'm sure you'll be able to pick a bargain second-hand copy, but all of these books really important. If you want the academic approach, go to Graves. What a wonderful scholar. If you want to have an entertaining look, go to Boyett and thrill yourself and your children. And if you want to have a real sense of mythology and how it links to all world cultures, grab this. If you like the type of books that we feature here on Reading for Wisdom, do please give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and come over to readingforwisdom.com, where we post all sorts of interesting material. See you next time.